There he is.
All
Look at
right,
that.
movie
Let's go.
makers, how we doing? Happy Thursday. I am super excited to be joined here by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, author of this amazing book, 10X is Easier Than 2X. This is my favorite book of the year. I was just telling Ben a little bit about it. We didn't go into too deep because I wanted to share live with you guys here. So we're going to talk about how to 10X your business, some of the lessons I learned, some of the things I'm still struggling with as a result of reading this book. I don't know if you can see, I have like massively marked up this book. So almost every like second or third page, there's some note there. So I get sent a lot of books from a lot of friends. And sometimes you have to read a book because it's from a friend and the book is, it's an okay book, but this is legit a great book. My favorite book of the year. So we're going to have a quick conversation about 10X and how to 10X your movement and your business. And then we're going to get to some questions from you guys. So like we've had other guests on before, if you want to ask Ben a question, use the hand reaction tool, and we'll dive into some coaching later on in the session. All right, why don't we start with this, Ben? 10X is easier than 2X. The concept is that it's easier to grow 10 times than it is 2 times, which feels like a brain twist, right? Like that's not possible. So why don't you give us, the people who aren't familiar with the concept, why that's possible, what it means?
All right. So super happy to be with you all. Obviously happy to be here with Evan. So I'll share a couple tidbits, and as we go on, the idea will sink deeper and deeper. If I give it, it's like I can't just give you algebra in 10 seconds, but I'll give you the taste of it. And then as we go deeper and deeper and deeper, it's going to become more thoughtful. So let me explain the difference between 10X versus 2X. And this is one of the reasons why I love working with Dan is that he helps you kind of think in terms of opposites, right? So we wrote who, not how, as an example. And so he helps you think about, focus on who, don't focus on how, right? And so a lot of people talk about 10X, but they've never actually contextualized it where they've described its opposite. And in this case, we're describing the opposite of 10X as 2X. And so what are the two differences between 10X and 2X, just as a start? Well, if you're going to go for 2X growth in anything, call it you want to 2X your YouTube subscribers, as an example, right? Or 2X my book sales for me. What that means is that mostly I'm operating from my past. 2X is very linear. It means that you're using the past to dictate who you are in the present and what you're going to do in the future. And if you're going for 2X growth, then because it's linear, you don't really have to change that much. We actually use the 80-20 principle or model to kind of highlight these differences. So if you want to go for 2X growth, you can actually keep 80% of your life. You can keep 80% of your strategy, 80% of your clients, 80% of your time can be spent on the same things. You only have to change 20% of what you're doing, just as an idea. So 10X is going to be the opposite. 10X is where you imagine a seemingly impossible future. And by the way, all of you, if you really look at your life, you've accomplished this in time. Even going from crawling to walking is a 10X. Seriously, where you kind of went from one stage of being to another. And at that new stage where you're now walking, you've let go of your old self. You're no longer going to go back to crawling half the time. You're going to stick with walking. And now you have new freedoms and new potentials at your new level. So 10X is really about going to another level. But to do it, you operate from the future. You think about a future and a bigger future, a seemingly impossible future, and you use that future to dictate your strategy, not the past. So the past is going to dictate a 2X strategy. The future is going to dictate a 10X strategy. And this is where it gets kind of interesting. And so this is where we'll start to go into the flow of how it starts to get easier. There's a lot of research on this that if you start making your goals a lot bigger, higher goals have a lot less options. So I give an example of my son who's a tennis player. My son's a freshman tennis player. We live in Orlando, Florida, so tennis is a big deal there. My son is a freshman in high school and he wants to play college tennis, right? So I want you to think about this. In Orlando, where we live, there are hundreds and hundreds of coaches and academies that could probably get my son to the college level. Do you think there are more or less potential paths to getting from college or getting to pro if you decide to go for pro? Would you say there's more options and paths to get to college or to get to pro? I just want someone to shout it out.
They're muted.
Oh, okay. So give me a thumbs down.
But they're putting it in the chat.
Okay, got you. All right. So here we go. There are less options to go for the higher goal. Would you say that's right? So if you make the goal 10 times bigger, it immediately weeds out the 80%, right? So this is where it starts to become the opposite, that to go 10x, you actually have to let go of 80% of your life right now and go all in on the 20% that really matters. And over time, you go deep on that 20%, which is the effective stuff. And if you go deep on that stuff, you're going to get a lot bigger return. And so 10x simplifies things. It helps you find the few pathways that matter. So for my son, as an example, it would actually be easier for him to find a positive, useful strategy if he was going for pro rather than college, because then we'd have to find the few coaches in Orlando that could potentially get him there. He would have to really become aware of the few aspects of tennis that really matter from the pro level. Whereas if he's just going for college, he's going to keep a lot of aspects of tennis that aren't going to be that effective for him. Does that make sense? So higher goals weed out all of the 80% that doesn't matter. It simplifies your process. We can go into a lot more. Obviously, if you go for higher goals, you're going to have to get better teams and stuff like that. But I think that's a good start for now. What do you say?
No, that's great. I like it. People are already raising their hand, getting ready for asking questions.
I mean, there's a lot more to it, but I think that's a nice fresh start.
Okay, so what I loved about your book is we've heard the concept of, hey, you got to 10x your goals, think bigger, dream bigger, entrepreneurs, change the world, etc., which is great and inspiration.
Sure.
What I loved about yours is it's tactics of how to break it down. And the hardest one that I'm still wrestling with is you got to let go of 80% of the things that you're doing.
There you go.
So if you want to just double, you let go of 20% of the things that you're doing
and improve them or tweak them or whatever.
But if you want to go 10x, you have to let go of 80% of the things that you're doing, right? And so as I'm reading this, like I feel the, the stress and like, oh my gosh, what am I going to let go of? And in looking backwards, you have this great exercise like, hey, look back and realize you've already made 10x leaps, right? And so if I look back, well, I've already let go of a lot of stuff. We've got 52 people on staff now, right? So like I've let go of a lot of things, but if I had to analyze, how do I let go of 80% of the things that I'm currently doing right now? There's a lot of pain or resistance or even identity built
100%.
up into like doing the work. And so I read the book and I'm getting excited, like, oh, okay. I start making my list. And then I wake up tomorrow and I find myself back into doing the work that I was. Well, so how do we stay high at that level?
So the 80% represents your past self, right? It's what got you here. It was useful, but it no longer has the same juice to squeeze as it doesn't have 10x potential anymore. It may have in the past, right? Something that was once in your 20% that you got a lot of value and use out of, at some point, once you really grow, it might shift down to your 80% and it's no longer relevant. So like I give myself as an example. When I was a first year PhD student, my quote unquote, my 10x future self. And by the way, the core analogy of this book is Michelangelo who sculpted the David. One of the things that the Pope asked Michelangelo was, what is the secret behind how you made the David? And maybe you've heard it before, but he said, I took away everything that was not the David, right? I stripped away everything that was not the David. Have you guys heard that before? Yeah. So your 10x future self is the David, and you've got to strip away everything that's not the David. And so that's your 80%, and that's your past self. That's your, psychologists would call that your hidden commitments. These are things you committed to in the past and they were useful. So like as an example, for me, back when I was a grad student, I had 0 blog, 0 website. I just really wanted to be an author. And my quote unquote 10x future self was to be a professional author with one of the major publishers. I was also just brand new foster parent of 3 kids, and I wanted to, provide for my family and be a professional author. So I wanted to get a 6-figure book deal with one of the major publishers. So one of the nice things you can do if you're letting the future be the filter, which shapes that 20%, is I would ask a lot of professional authors and stuff like that. How do I get a 6-figure book deal in this case? And they're like, well, you got to start blogging. You got to actually build an email list, all that stuff. You got to get really good at blogging, good at communicating, good at writing. So that identified my 20% that I had to go all in on and get 10 times better at. You get 10 times better before you go 10 times bigger, right? And so I had to let go of a lot of 80%. For example, I had a job as a graduate student, 20 or 30 hours a week, that not only, gave us a little bit of an income, but it also allowed the university to take away my cost of tuition. And so after that first year of PhD school, I got really serious about my 10x future self, and the 20% that I was going to have to go all in on to get really good. That meant I had to let go of my university position and start paying for our own tuition. Scary. That was a massive risk. But to kind of go back to your question, so 80% represents security, right? It's your security blanket. Not only is it maybe the aspects of your business or your job that you're already really good at, or just that are in your comfort zone, but they're also your habits, right? They're the things that you do on a daily basis. It could be just hopping online and just scrolling when you're bored, right? It's your 80% that's honestly holding you back. It's your past self, but it's not your future self. And so it's your security blanket, and your 10x future self is freedom, which takes commitment and courage. So I think that one of the you don't strip it away all at once, by the way. Like, you strip away or uncommit to your 80% little by little. You become a lot more honest about your future self, a lot more honest about where you're going to start going deep and start really focusing on what you want and on what's going to have the biggest impact. And inevitably it's going to require you to let go of various relationships, situations, maybe clients. Like me, for example, I am letting go of my coaching program this year. This is my last year doing it. And it's like 60 or 70% of my income right now. Totally letting it go because I know it's part of my 80%. Even though right now it's great security and right now it's great, I know if I keep it, it's going to keep me from fully committing to my next 10x. And so I'm willing to let that go, even though sometimes it's harder. Some things are easier to let go of. Some, you got toxic friends or something like that, where it's like, yeah, this is my 80%. Like, I don't, there's no anger towards those past friends, love them just like you love your past self and you honor them, but they're no longer in the direction you're going. So some things you can let go of easier. Some things, the more and more you start connecting and identifying with your future self, the more organically, eventually you're just going to let it go. It takes time.
How do we maintain this? I mean, for me too, how do I
Yeah.
making it selfish? You guys can all learn.
No,
You
this
can
is
all learn
great.
through me. How do I maintain the commitment and courage? This is why I love microdosing on books, because I get a little bit of Ben every week. I get a little bit of like the 10x mindset every week. When you're reading the book, or maybe kind of even hanging out here with Ben, you're meeting him for the first time, perhaps you get inspired, motivated. How do you maintain that? Because it's an identity shift, it's a habit shift, it's a way of thinking shift. And so you can get these moments of these boosts of excitement and like, yes, here's what I'm trying to do and build and create. And then it's so easy to fall back down tomorrow and not stay committed to the cause.
Yeah. So I look at 10x, like a 10x psychology, as three things. It's fundamentally three things. It's one, it's your identity. Two, it's your time, which is really about your attention. And then three, it's your leadership. And we can go into all three of these, but just going into identity for a second. Your identity is two things. It's your story and it's your standards. It's the story you have about your past self and the story you have about your future self. And so one thing that I could think about you could do, Evan, is more and more your story becomes less about what you've done and more about where you're going, right? Who's your future self? Start being a lot more honest about that. Start being a lot more honest about where you're going to go deep and about, what you're going to be focused on. Like, that story is going to shape your priorities. In terms of standards, because I said identity is two things. It's story and standards. Your standards is essentially your floor and your ceiling, right? But it's also whatever you're focusing on and whatever you're committing to. So like, one of the things that I do is I'm always trying to raise my floor, right? My floor are like the elements of my life that are still in my 80%. So like, I might, part of my floor might be that, in just being honest, if I'm looking at my day, that I, still consume all sorts of trash food, right? Or I spend 3 hours of my day doing X that's totally a waste, right? And that's just part of my floor. All progress starts by telling the truth. And so I could raise that floor a little bit week by week. You don't go 10x tomorrow. So every week you can start to shape your story. How can I operate more today as my future self versus my past self? What aspects of my floor can I raise where I'm focused on quality over quantity? So this takes me to time. And I'm just going to tell you two aspects of time. One is your attention, and the second one is flow. So you can start to shape your week around being in flow in your 20%. And this is not about what habits you can put in place to get into a flow state. I think that that's kind of 2x thinking, honestly. It's about how you can refine and reshape your entire calendar and schedule around your 20%. So as an example, and also honestly, just about being in flow, the more you go 10x, it's about quality, not quantity. So on a daily basis, rather than trying to do 10 things, you say, what are the 1 or 2 things that are going to have the biggest impact? This is me going deep in my 20%. This is where I'm going to get a bigger return on my attention. So rather than me trying to do 50 things in a day, I start thinking about bigger things, higher quality, less quantity. I start thinking, what's 1 or 2 things I could do today? They're going to pay me long-term in the future. This is deeper work. This is growth, but also you start, actually having more time for recovery and thinking, because if you're going to go for bigger leaps, it's not about busyness, it's about actual like impact. And so that means you're going to have more time for recovery and thinking. If you think about any high level performer, recovery is a big part of that. LeBron James, he's one of the best athletes of all time. If you actually study his process, most of it's around recovery. Space, if you recover well, then you can go deep when you're actually in practice or getting ready to like get better at your craft, go deep in your 20%. So I'm gonna simplify this for you guys real quick. For Evan, whatever your 10x is, whatever it is you're trying to accomplish, certainly, it would be good for you to think about who's your future self. Like, what does that 10x look like? And start designing your days and weeks and months around you being more in that story and more in that. And that's going to emphasize, like, now let's look at your calendar and where can we shape it around you being more and more in the 20%, and how can we peel away some of that 80%? Maybe you eliminate some of it over time. That would be raising your floor. Or maybe you apply who, not how, which would be the leadership side, where you start getting someone else to handle that so that you can spend more and more of your time going deep in whatever your 20% is. Maybe it's you writing a book, right? Maybe it's you, whatever it is that you want to go 10x at. And your time starts slowing down and you have less and less, honestly. When you go 10x, and this is the last thought on it, your time is less thinly sliced. It's less scattered. So you're probably not going to have meetings every day. Like you want more days for deep blocks, for deep thinking, deep work, deep growth, unless for some reason or another, your 10X invites you to have that like meetings all the time. But I think you'd start stacking away meetings, maybe batching them so that maybe once or twice a week, you have more meetings and you've got more time for going deep. So that's how I'd start to think about it. I don't know. Like you tell me now when the rubber meets the road, that stuff doesn't truly make sense to you.
No, it makes sense. I think it's, and for everybody, your future self is Ben's last book before the 10X book. So when he's referencing that, you can go check that one out as well.
I mean, let's get hardcore on it for a second. Like you talking about it, like, cause I like with all the mumbo jumbo I just said, how would you apply that seriously to your own 10X? Like call it for the rest of May.
Yeah.
How could you redesign May? Cause if you were to take a hard look at your May, I'm guessing that a lot of it's in your 80%, and it might already be pre-committed to your 80%. But how, maybe you could shuffle it a little bit so that you have bigger blocks to going deep on something you really care about.
Yeah, it's making that thought process a daily habit, and maybe even multiple times per day.
Habits are always the byproduct of calendars and schedules.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to start with your calendar and schedule rather than trying to build a habit into your pre-existing schedule. So it's so much easier if you start with design. Like I look at habits as micro. I look at your schedule and your life design as macro. And it's a lot easier to change the micro by changing the macro. So rather than focusing on behavior, which is honestly a painful process, you actually just start to redesign the macro of your life. So that would be like, take a hard look at your Q2 and like, what does your Q2 already look like that you've already pre-committed that it's going to be, and start to say, honestly, how much of this is me in 2X mode? And like, how much of this can I uncommit to or renegotiate or honestly let go of, or just resituate so that I free up a lot more time and a lot more space. If you're going to go 10X, you need a lot more white space, a lot more freedom of thought. There's actually a great quote from Dan Sullivan on this. He says that entrepreneurs who are too tightly scheduled don't have the space to transform themselves. So in a lot of ways, you have to free yourself from that. And once you've done that and you've kind of resituated your calendar, your schedule, even potentially your goals, habits become a lot easier to work with. If you're just working on habits, you're honestly, I actually look at that as 2X personally.
So we had Stephen Kotler here at the last Genius event, and he was talking about flow. And Stephen's the world's leading living expert on flow. And after that meeting, I changed my schedule. And I agree with you, schedule creates the habits, so that I'm walking outside 3 hours a day.
So already, I mean, you just changed your whole habits around changing your schedule.
Exactly. And so I figure, I feel like this needs to be incorporated into one of the daily things I'm doing, so that it's a more regular, consistent thought, not just on the big things I'm doing, but in the day-to-day. Like, do I still need to even do this? Is this still even as valuable? Like, could I outsource this to somebody else? Am I still getting joy and pleasure from this? Like, it feels like, at least for me, until it becomes second nature. I don't know if it ever becomes fully second nature, but
I think it does. I think, just put it this way.
Yeah.
You right now are 10X where you were at one point in the past, and 100X where you were at various points. So would you say that your life right now is second nature to you? Your current life.
Yeah.
Yeah. Your current life is second nature to you. You've normalized it. You've adapted to it. Even though if we went back to your past self, who was, call it 1/10 of where you're at now in various aspects, in knowledge, skills, if your past self was looking at your current self, that would seem like an impossible gap. And this would not be second nature to your past self. This would be almost like unfathomable. But because you went deep and you've ultimately become who you are, you've now normalized this as your regular life. And so, yes, it is second nature to you. And so whenever you think about your next quote unquote big leap, 10x jump, your next level, right now, it does not seem second nature to you. Right now, it seems unfathomable to you. But eventually it will be your second nature, and you're going to be at a 10x place in various aspects than you are now. And a lot of that 10x is not necessarily quantity. A lot of it's in terms of quality, in terms of value. Your time is going to be spent on things you value more, on things that are more important to you. And maybe there's 10x quantity there. For you, maybe you will be used to having a channel that's 35 million people, and you'll have a lot of different challenges and opportunities and problems with that, and you'll be used to it at that level. So yeah, you will make it second nature. We always do.
Yeah. I mean, I guess it's just once you get there, then what's the next 10x leap, right? So it's like making the 10x thinking second nature.
It is a process. So this is a continuous process that every time, wherever you're at right now, you're at a 10x place compared to your past self. And the question is, do you stick with the 80% security that got you here? As an example. So for me, back to my story of 10x, 10x author, I did go deep on that 20%. I did become a massive blogger. My blogs were viewed over a 2.5 period of time, over 100 million times. And I was able to literally organically build an email list of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Therefore, I got my book deal. I became my 10x future self. I'm now at a different place. Now, the question is, from that new place, I'm now at a different spot than my past self. It's kind of like climbing a mountain or getting to a new level. From up here, I can now view vistas, opportunities, new opportunities that my past self could never see. So now, as this, quote unquote future self, I can see and create a next 10x that my former self could have never even imagined. But that next 10x is going to invite me into a new 20%, a new growth journey, a new development. And it's not going to be about more, it's going to be about different and better. And so blogging, which was something I did very aggressively for 3 or 4 years, shifted to my 80%, and I had to let it go because it was no longer relevant to the new deep dive of mastery and development. When you go deep into the 20%, whatever that is for you, you're going to go into a higher level of mastery and development, which is going to, by getting 10 times better and more nuanced and more skilled in what you do for whoever you do it for, the 10x becomes very possible. And so, yeah, I would just say, and I even forgot your question at this point, but the things that you've invested a lot into, this is one of the reasons why it's actually hard, because you gave your soul, in a lot of ways, your time, your energy, your effort, and your identity into whatever you became. And now what you've become, you've normalized, and now it's not just your 20%, now it's your whole life. And so now, we're saying you're going to have to let go of huge aspects of who you are or who you were to go deep into now who's your next 10x future self. What's, using the hero's journey, what's the next call to adventure, right? And of course, the second step of the hero's journey is the resistance to the call, right? Which is then to retreat back to your 80% security blanket, right? And so, yeah, you can go to the call again and peel away more and more of the layers of the onion or of the David and find out more and more of who you really are at the purest essence and the highest level of mastery and contribution you can make. Or you can say, this is the level I'm comfortable with. I'm happy with this 80%. I'm going to stay here. And sometimes we stay in that 80% for years and maintain it. We'll hold on to it. And sometimes we never actually go deep dive into our next level of mastery. So anyways.
No, it's great. One of the things I had to pay attention to is the language, like the language I tell myself when we cross 50 employees. It's like, we have 50 people on our team. That's crazy.
I mean, that's epic. It's shocking compared, when you think about your past stuff. Yeah, keep going.
But then I realized, but if that's crazy, then I don't get to 500.
There you go.
Right? Like, it's not that crazy. This is easy. Like 500 is not even that crazy, right? And so just reframing how you see where you're currently at and what you've done. Yes, be grateful to kind of the gap in the game. Be grateful for what you've done, but it's not crazy, and you're capable of so much more. So I've just been paying attention to the language I use around the things we've accomplished.
I'll say one more thing real quick, and then if we can go, these people are just wherever you want to go, Evan. But yeah, if you're using your current circumstances as the filter for what you do moving forward, then you're going to be in your 80%, because your current circumstances are mostly 80%, right? And so what got you here was using a very desirable future, which at some points may have seemed impossible to you, definitely to other people. And you let that then be the determining factor for what you said yes and no to. That's you using the future as the filter. That's a more exponential mindset. That's a more 10x mindset. That's a higher level mastery where you're using your future self and your future identity and your future vision as the determiner for what you say yes and no to, and what you filter out and what you start letting go of and peeling away. And so, it's an invitation for all of you to look at your current life and say, are you going 2x, which is letting your current self and your current results shape what you do and what you think is possible? So this would be like Evan thinking 50 is crazy, or he can, if he wants to, if it's relevant, it may not be relevant, think to 500 employees and say, what would need to be true for us to get to that level? If that's even the right metric. Maybe he doesn't need 500 employees to get the 10x he wants, right? If it's about having 35 million subscribers, that might not require 500 employees. You might use that metric as the determining factor of what you start saying yes and no to. So what you optimize for really matters, which is, 10xing your employees is very different than 10xing your subscribers, and they're going to lead to a different path, a different process. And so asking what's the 10x worth going for, and how is that going to shape what we start saying yes and no to, and what we start going deep on.
All right, now you see why I love this guy so much. Let's do some Q&A. So guys, there's already a bunch of hands going up. Let's bring up Ronald. Let's ask him to unmute, and then let's see what he's got for us. No, we can't. Hold on, let me ask you to unmute. There you go. You can get that. The suspense is killing me here.
It's all good. No, we're good. Ronald's got this.
Do you see it, Ronald? Not allowing to unmute.
So,
there we go.
Thank you, Benjamin Hardy, for paving a super highway filled with gold for everybody. And I'm going to recommend that everybody go back and listen to that first half hour at least 3 or 4 times, because he talks so fast and he drops so much information that it's amazing. So my short story and my question. I've been working on a startup for a couple of years to change the world. Pre-revenue, don't need the money, God bless. But my current job is kind of paying for that. As I've been spending more time and having more success launching the Save the World project, I've cut back on the other part of my coaching, probably 50%. Are you saying give up everything and just take that other 20 hours and visualize, like Evan says, walking 3 hours a day, doing the things that I will do once that project is actually launched, to just to step into it and to visualize it that much more? Or, because this is the comfort zone question, and I know that this is probably the question you get most often. What would the 3 easiest ways for me to ease off my coaching practice more to work on saving the world?
Yeah. So every person's in a different situation, and therefore is going to have a different process of letting that go. I'll share with you a couple different examples, and ultimately I can't give you a perfect formula because I don't have your situation. I don't have your goals. I don't have, if you had, just as an example, if you had $5 extra million, just as a thought, that might change your process, right? And so it might not. I'm just saying, if you had, I'm just saying, I don't know the full dynamics of your situation, but let me give one example. So Brooke Castillo, which you probably know her, right?
Yep.
So she talks about, and one thing I will say is the 80% is going to defend itself very deeply. The 80, that might be people, right? That's, people on the team who are just honestly not ready to go 10x with you. Like, they're going to defend the status quo, right?
Sure.
2x does not want to change. The 80% does not want you to change. It wants things to stay the same. And so even your past self is going to defend itself. But one of the things that Brooke Castillo talks about, I'm just giving you an example, is she realized as a coach that she wasn't going to be able to go to her next level if she continued to do one-on-one coaching. That was just something she realized, and that was something that her business was initially built around. And so she had to ask, if I want to really get to my goal, which I think at that time was getting to like 10 or $50 million revenue, she knew that she could no longer be the one-on-one coach. And so, and again, this is a very there's different models and there's different ways of looking at this. But for her, she had to slowly peel away her being the one-on-one coach and getting lower level, not lower level, but other coaches to take over that portion so that she could then like do things around group coaching and platform building and stuff like that. And admittedly, a lot of her legacy clients that were used to her being the one-on-one coach were pretty upset because they 2X will defend itself, right? And she had to accept that was part of the process of her reaching the people that she now felt inspired to reach and to do what so that process probably took her a year or two to hire on and bring on other coaches and transition the clients who were going to continue with her so that she could shift over. Dan Sullivan's done it a similar way where he has like multiple levels of his coaching program, and over time, he lets go of those lower levels, right? So like there's like the core signature level. He let go of that and he had like 17 coaches who handle that for him. But this year, just like recently, he let go of his 10X program. And so he's now, but he gave himself 2 years to do that. But that took up 180 of his work days. Like that took up a lot of his time. And so he gave himself a deadline. He gave himself a few years to build up the team, the process so that, at a certain point he could get there, and now he's let that go. And so you got to ask yourself, is this something you're going to eliminate altogether? Or is this something that you're going to maintain but have someone else do? One of the examples that I used in the book is from the book Good to Great. Have you ever read that book? Maybe yes or no. Did you read the book Good to Great?
They said great book. Yeah.
Okay. So in that book, and you'll see it, I think it's in chapter 2 or 3. You know the story of Kimberly-Clark, the paper mill company? You remember this story? So basically what happened was a new CEO came in. This was back in 1971, but Kimberly-Clark paper company had been around for over 100 years. And the major thing that this company did was make paper through paper mills for things like magazines, like paper, and essentially what the new CEO did is he took a hard look at it and he realized that 95% of their revenue was in the paper mills, making types of paper that were sent to other businesses like B2B. Right? Paper for magazines and stuff like that, for printers and stuff like that. But 5% of their business was kind of on this thing that was more business to consumer. They had just created what are called Kleenex, right? You guys ever heard of Kleenex? And toilet paper and stuff like that, right? And so he realized that he thought from his perspective, we can stay good if we keep the paper mills. But I think we could become great if we go all in on this thing that's only right now 5% of our revenue. And he said, I think we should sell the paper mills and go all in on this thing that right now is only 5% of our revenue, but I think we could become truly great in the long run if we went all in on this and really master this. He said, I think I see a potential of world-class capability here. And this I think would fit with the idea of mastery. And even Dan Sullivan has a concept he calls unique ability. But basically, what did they do? They decided to sell the mills, which was seemingly business suicide. This was 95% of their revenue and what was their bread and butter as a company for 100 years. And basically he said, I'm going to sell the mills, and everyone thought he was an idiot, thought he was like, how could you possibly do this? This is a very successful, powerful company. They took all the money and they went all in on stuff like Kleenex and stuff. 25 years later, you fast forward, it's the biggest paper company in the world because they went for they went for great. And in that case, that was going all in on their 20%. And they let go of what was the good. So in their case, they sold it and just stopped. So there's going to be different models for how you approach this. For me, as an example, I'm just letting go of my coaching program. I'm not going to sell it. I'm just going to let it go. And I might create something new with someone else. But in terms of a lot of the stuff I've been doing for the last 5 years, chapter's over. Next 10X is inviting me into a new 20%.
Let's go. All right. I love it. Let's bring up.
Is that all right for you, my man?
That's great. Okay, let's bring
Such
up.
a great group, dude.
Thank you.
I mean, how could you not be a great group though if you guys are hanging out with this guy? I mean,
We got James in the house. How we doing, James?
Hey, Evan, I'm good. Thank you for this. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, Dan. Congratulations. I've watched you get prolific. So when you did Willpower Doesn't Work, it was one of the books that really connected to me because you described it as a dangerous fad, which is part of this question. So I was going to ask you about authoring and how you went from this blogger to being a prolific author, but I think you've kind of answered that. I think the thing the group and I would benefit from, so I'm doing Evan's selfish, but I am unselfishly helping the group. Can you talk a little bit about the practical steps of removing the 80% of the blogging and what the practicalities of that were. You talked about calendaring and scheduling, but I'd love to know a little bit about how did you become more prolific? And I know in your books, you're starting to talk about how Dan and you are kind of challenging each other to produce more content that's going to help people transform their lives. So that's the part A. And then the part B is that as we think about migrating to our future self, and we have this intention of identity, evolving to that identity, what do you think are the dangerous fads now?
That's really interesting. That second one, I'm going to have to think a lot more about. In terms of the first one, as an example, letting go of the blogging, right? Again, from where I was, I had to ask myself, what's my next 10x? And is blogging going to be in that 20% that's going to support that? You know, it forces you to be really discerning. Back to the idea of my son as a college tennis player, right? Or as a high school. If he wants to go for pro, he's going to have to get new coaches, right? He's going to have to learn skills and stuff like that he would never have to even think about if his goal was to stay for college, right? And so for me, I was like, well, I wanted to become, you know, less about a big author, more about a really exceptional writing really important books. And so for me, you know, obviously selling books mattered and making an income mattered, right? But it wasn't all about building the audience at that point. It was about now producing work that was a lot harder. In the book, actually, I even share the example of James Clear, because James Clear went through a similar example where he was blogger and he had to shift to a deeper form of work to write a book. It's a lot longer form of a process to write a deep, really high quality book than to crank out blog posts, right? It's a different type of work. It's a bigger fish. And so, you know, I had to get clear, what's my 10X? For me, it was 10X better author, write 10, you know, really good books. But for me as well, I also do like being prolific. You know, I want to write more books, but I also want I want to ensure they're enormously better. And so for me, that being the filter to what I say yes and no to, continuing to crank out blog posts wasn't going to fit that. Instead, I needed to actually go deep on actually like studying the craft of writing books and honestly like learning how to storytell and do a lot of develop skills that I honestly just didn't need to develop as a blogger. Like there's a lot of different skills and deep work that go into writing books. And so every 10X is going to invite that 20%, which is a level of mastery and skill development. And so I, you know, ultimately went deep on those things, and it's a work in progress. You know, I would say I published Willpower Doesn't Work about 5 years ago. It was in March of 2018. So it was 5 years ago. So I would say that over these last, if I was to compare this book with Willpower Doesn't Work, I would argue that this is a 10 times better book.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. I ordered it. I'm ready. It comes on Tuesday. I can't wait. Yeah.
So all I'm going to say is I think I've gone through that process. And I would argue I'm a 10 times better author than I was from my first book. My books are now approaching 1 million copies as well. And so now, you know, I'm at a place where I'm deeply asking, what's my next 10X? You know, where do I want to go deep on now that's going to invite me into a deeper, maybe even a more important form of mastery than I haven't been paying attention to now because I've been so focused on the mastery that's gotten me here. So I don't know, does that help? I mean, I know that that's still principle level, but
yeah, it does.
Blogging would have just been a distraction for me really doing what I would have done. If I would have kept blogging, I might have done 2 or 3 books right now rather than 6. But most importantly, I wouldn't have gotten to the point where I could have written a book at this level, you know?
Excellent.
Quality
just
over
more
quantity.
value on. You already answered some of the question I had early on, and you've just added more to that. So thank you very much.
Totally.
All right. Thank you, James. Let's bring up Rose. She's next. Let's ask her to unmute and see what she's got for Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Okay. So me and my husband, we watch you at nighttime on our YouTube stretching. We stretch at night and you're on. So I'm stoked.
Thank you. Grateful to be with you. Super grateful to be with you.
You just need a Ben Hardy stretching video now. That's the next thing. Yeah, exactly. Think about yourself, you know, it's great.
And then you had one about meditation. So I thought that you were going to lead me to a meditation, but you were talking about, I forgot what you were talking about, but anyways, you had something about manifestation where to like future, like you said to write down, like think of what you can achieve like a couple of months from now.
Sure.
And I did. And you said to visualize this person.
Sure.
I did it like the first week. I did the first week and I stopped. So how, I don't know. There's a lot of questions. Sorry.
So you
Okay.
stopped- so let me just get to the point. You
Okay.
stopped imagining and thinking of your future self, and you shifted back to living as your current self day to day.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
Good. So what do you have a
Yes.
second question? Obviously, I can share with you my thoughts on the simpler ways, and it's similar to what I was talking to Evan about before, but I can answer that question on like a daily basis process. But do you want to ask your second question first, or you said you had
Yeah.
more?
Yeah. So you have a lot of quotes that you say when you're speaking. How do you remember them?
I don't know. I've just been studying this stuff very intensely for 12, 15 years, and the things that stick out to me, I write down and I think about deeply, and they inform how I see the world. And so it's not that hard to draw, because it's not like it's not just an idea. It's something I really deeply chew on, and it informs kind of, how I see the world and the choices I make. So the quotes that I share are usually ones that I've riffed through my brain a million times. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
um and I do a lot of writing and a lot of thinking, and also a lot of teaching and talking, and so those things get dotted and connected together, from like a neuro perspective. A lot of these quotes are tied together in certain ways, and so when I start talking about one, boom, another just kind of just pops next to it, right? Because they're connected to each other, in terms of like the neurons and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So here's kind of how to think about your future self, right? And this, Dan and I did write The Gap in the Gain, which I think is a great book on kind of reviewing your progress. But one thing you can do, so I think it's crucially important at the end of your day to journal for 5 minutes and actually review the day, and actually look at the day and say, how much of that day was spent as my future self versus how much of that day was spent just honestly in my autopilot as my past self, just kind of rolling through the motions. You could say how much of it was in my 20%, how much of it was in my 80%, right? You could like review that. And so I think if you just reflected for 5 minutes, and then at the end of your day, right? It's really, the end of the day is so crucial, because it really sets the tone for not only how you're going to sleep, but also what you commit to, and ultimately what you wake up to and how you operate the next day. To me, it's the most crucial time, and it really isn't that complicated. I just think do an honest review. Also, you could do a bigger term review if you wanted, like look back on your last year. And my guess is that actually you are a lot more as your future self than you're giving yourself credit for. You're actually doing better than you think you are. But you can still be honest. You can still see the areas where you're still kind of, not operating as your future self. Because if you were, you'd start planning different and better days and weeks. But so for me, it's really simple. Just daily, end of the day, journal for 5 minutes, actually honest review how much of my day was spent operating as my future self, how much of it was in my 80, how much of it was in my 20. The 80 would be me, going back to my past self, being busy, not productive, being distracted, not being purposeful, not being intentional. And then I could think like, what would a future self day look tomorrow? What are the most important things I could do tomorrow that are going to have the biggest return on my investment of time tomorrow? What's important, not urgent? What are the 1 or 2 things that my future self would have me do that I can go deep on, in my 20%? Maybe it's, this connects with flow. Flow can be deeply focusing on something, but it could also be recovery. So maybe it's me spending more thoughtful time with my kids, right? And so just designing your days, but then at the end of your week, design your week. So like review your week for 20 minutes, just a weekly review. How much of it was spent as your future self? How did you design it? Did you design it for flow so that you can go deep on a few things, for focus and recovery? Or was it honestly just pretty not well designed? And it was kind of designed around being busy in the 80%, and just looking at it and then saying, how can I reset next week so that it's a little better, right? So that maybe it's a little bit more oriented as my future self, right? And deeper in the 20% of things that really matter. And what are some things that maybe I want to either let go of or totally recreate, right? Maybe I've got meetings scattered throughout the week. Maybe some of them honestly have got to go. So I can focus on the few things that really matter, or maybe I could crunch them all together on Friday or something like that, so that they're all blocked together, so that I've just created a lot more space for deep work, or for honestly just deep recovery. So I just think it's a day by day, week by week, month by month process. It's not like you try to just like do it once and then lock it in. It's just like every day review. How are you doing as your future self? How are you doing as your past self? Tomorrow, what does your future self want you to do? Just do it on a weekly basis, monthly basis, just continually review and reset. And it's just continuous.
Thank you. And Another quick question. I'm sorry. How do you prepare yourself before your TED Talks, like going on stage? Do you have a routine, or like you jump up and down, do burpees? Like, what do you do?
For me, I'm usually by myself, like I try to be alone. I usually am listening to like, music or good books. I usually honestly take caffeine, just to kind of like get myself focused. And then I just kind of let it go, I honestly just, I mean, it's nice to have an outline. So if I'm using slides, it's very easy because I can just use that as kind of like a stabilizer. But I think you get better and better at not being so attached to a single performance, right? So for example, like I want to, provide as much for you as I can. Again, Evan makes this really easy because he's here as well. But I want this to be great, but I'm also not as attached to this one performance. Like I'm gonna take it, I'm gonna turn it into a positive. I'm gonna learn from it. Hopefully, we provide a lot and just move forward and do the next. And just keep moving forward. And so you don't have, for me at least, I don't need to overly hype, overly crank my energy up, overly, I don't need to have such highs and lows in terms of each one anymore. It's like you can kind of smooth out the process.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Rose. All right. Who we got next? We got Milko in the house. Let's ask Milko to unmute and see what he's got for us.
Hello again, and thank you for this amazing session. And I don't want to take too much time, so I'll try to go directly to the question because it's not very well formed in my head. But how, let's say you have this vision of your 10x. How do you go back to know which are actually the activities that you need to do and you need to focus on? Because I'll give you an example with myself. For example, I know what I would like to do, but the question is, my actions so far haven't bring me too close to what I do, because I don't, I guess when you go to a higher level, then you kind of have better idea what works and what doesn't, so you know what to focus on and stuff like that. Or I don't know, maybe it's not the case. But the question is how to know what exactly, or at least the direction of the things that I need to do to reach this 10x. Because I have the vision of how this 10x looks, but I have no idea what are the steps, because I don't have the problem with the execution. For example, when I have the idea and I put things in my schedule, I execute, but then I end up in a point that I'm not sure what's the next step. I don't know what to do next. So I waste my time, let's say, wondering.
So
I don't know if it makes sense.
yeah, so there's different aspects, right? Like the path forward isn't always clear, and the path is going to change along the way. In psychology, they call that pathways thinking. It's not like once you've clarified the 10x, you immediately know the 20%, and you're like, okay, I'm going to spend the next 3 years just doing this one thing, and it'll all take care of itself, right? Like you're all, sometimes you're gonna figure things out along the way. Like you'll do your best to find out, and I love the concept of reverse engineering. So like, for example, when I wanted to become a professional author, I obviously like went and asked a lot of people who were already there or who were close or who were, in that realm. Where should I focus? Where do I need to like actually put my energy and attention? Ultimately, I'm my own person. I've got my own path. Every single person actually is an outlier. Your own future self is not going to look like anyone else's. Even though I'm an author, I'm different than any other author. I've got a different path, a different process. And so, you can only learn so much from other people, but they can help point you to the right direction. And so as you clarify your future self, I think you want to think about a few things. You want to think about what's the situation? What are the circumstances? Where do you want to be? But also, who do you want to be? Like, what are you actually doing? What are you actually doing well? And what kind of impact can you be having? And what does that look like? Right. And so if you start to clarify the characteristics of your future self and kind of who you are and what you're doing, I think that can start to point you to where you start developing skills and capabilities. Like I think about Evan, he's got so many, skills that his past self probably didn't have, in terms of not only like obviously thinking through like YouTube and stuff like that, but also like how he teaches, how he trains, how he, and so those were things that he ultimately chose to master because they were relevant to where he wanted to go and where he's continuing to want to go.
So it's kind of more to focus on what kind of person do we need to become to be able to reach this 10x.
I think that's big part of it. The second part would be then what are the pathways that are ultimately going to get you there? As an example, for me, one of the pathways back when I wanted to become a professional author was, well, I got to figure out a way to get a bunch of blog subscribers. So that led me to the pathway of blogging on YouTube, right? I could have, blogging on medium.com. I could have easily, just as much back then, come to the pathway of creating YouTube. Instead, I went blogging because I felt like that was more relevant to the 10X that I wanted, but I could have found a different pathway, a different strategy, different relationships, right? And so, yes, it's a big part of it. Big part of it's who you want to become and who you want to develop yourself into and stuff like that. But this, just as equally or, just as importantly as, what are the pathways, the relationships, you're in this group as an example because you feel like being in this group is part of the pathway to helping you develop the skills, characteristics, relationships that are going to help you get where you want to go. Right. So this is a path. Right. And so you also want to think about, tactically or strategically, like what is the most likely way, and starting to be honest about maybe this path isn't working anymore. That's part of adapting too, is continuing to adjust, find more and more useful paths to getting to where you want to go. And sometimes, a path that got you a few steps forward now is leading you to a better path that's going to get you 5 steps forward, So continually adapting and iterating along the way too, and being honest, is this the most useful, effective process to getting me where I'm trying to go?
Let me piggyback off this.
Go
I'm
for it,
curious.
please.
No, I'm curious for you. So Beth Handel, I did a YouTube session with her where she was coaching me. She's Gary Vee's life coach.
Wow.
Okay. And you think of Gary Vee as being the life coach. And like, oh, he has a life coach. And so I did a session with her, and one of her main things is F the how.
Yeah, there you go.
And she swears, I don't. But
Sure.
and that it's really just believing. And I have not fully embodied this because I love the plan. Like I see a plan, I want to invest in a plan.
Sure,
How did
sure,
you do this? Let me model your success plan. She's like, the big difference between you and Gary and the people who've like accomplished even way
10X
more,
you.
10X.
Sure.
Yeah. You and 10X you, there you go, like that reframe is there's just focused on that it's possible and that great things come to you and not so much worried about the plan. And so I am definitely not there yet, but that's part of my daily process is like, how do I just live in
the future self.
Live in future self, live in great things come to me, live in 10X mode. And if you're living there, then the how
Well, so this reminds me of be, do, have. If you start being from your future self, right? And you start operating from that identity, operating from that level of acceptance, it's not that the how doesn't show up, but that the how is coming from the operation of the result rather than you trying to strategize from the present towards the future. You're actually operating from the future and different things come to you, right? And so I mean, as a whole, I agree with that. That's why I would say it's you are going to have a how though, like at the end of the day, your daily process is going to be a how. But I think continually being open to, a future and not getting so attached to a how. Like Gary Vee does have a how. He keeps filming videos and stuff like that. But I think that the more and more you just start being as your future self, it's certainly going to look different than what you're doing right now because you're doing it from the future.
Yeah. No.
And you also make it easier because, there's a great quote actually in the book. Have you ever read the book As a Man Thinketh?
No, I haven't.
Yeah. Well, one of the simple things he says is we do not attract what we want, but who we are. And so when you start operating as your future self, accepting your future self, you go from the layer of thinking to feeling to knowing. So thinking is about thinking about your future self, imagining it, right? But then you get to the place of feeling. This is kind of, I think, where Dr. Joe Dispenza's work really is, where it's like you start to emotionally accept, allow, be grateful for that, right? And then you get to the place of knowing where you know that what you want is already yours. And so once you get to that place, then you start attracting, honestly, from that perspective, a lot of the things you want, but also you start to become aware of things. You start to get ideas and insights about, oh, maybe I should reach out to that person, right? You stop being so attached to a certain habit. That doesn't mean that you don't get ideas that you then go and execute on.
Yeah. I mean, it's like be your future 10X self
now,
and then and then better hows will show up.
Well, hows from the future will show up, not hows from this.
Right.
This goes straight back to the idea of 10X versus 2X. 2X is going to be linear. It's going to be from the present and past, whereas 10X is going to be more in this operation of you're operating from the future. And the hows are going to look exponentially different because they're coming from a different future rather than from your present. So it's not going to be linear. It's going to be very non-linear. You see what I'm saying? Those hows are going to look very different because they're coming from your future and from your future identity. And so they're not going to look the same as what you've been doing in the past.
Yeah, it's been a challenge for me too. So it's like it's not maybe you
It's
guys.
a challenge for all of us from
Yeah.
where we're at, because we all get caught in our current situation and our current momentum, and it's an invitation to keep going to that next level future, and operating from a higher place, and letting higher opportunities come to us. So it never goes away, by the way. This whole process continues.
Yeah. All right.
Amazing.
Thank you, Milko.
And just a quick, is it better if we actually don't see our 10x, we see our 100x, and we aim for that?
I mean, at that point, I think it's just semantics. If you want to do that, you can. Either way, once you get there or halfway there, you're going to be a different person. You're going to be a different person in 3 months from now. And so what you see in the future is going to look different even in 3 months from now. I look at the past as a draft that I'm continually redrafting, creating a better and better meaningful past, but also the future is a draft. Next week, I'm going to know a lot of things I don't know, right? My future self, even a week from now, is different than I know. And so I'll be able to clarify and chisel the direction, the vision. I'll know a lot of things in a week from now I don't know today.
Yeah, and one of the things that I picked up from Ben as well is to 2x, you can double your workload, just double your effort, and you can get there. But the idea of going 10x, or if you want to do 100x, you can't 100x or 10x your work load.
Yeah.
So it forces you to think differently. And that's the whole point. Like if you wanted to grow by 10x or 12x or 23.5x or 100x or whatever, you have to think differently and be doing different things, as opposed to, and listen, 2x is still a great number for most people, right? It's like if I doubled my business, like that's still a great number, but a lot of people do it by just doing more of the same thing, as opposed to saying, no, like 80% of what I'm doing, that's why it's scary. 80% of what I'm doing will not help me get to the next level. So it fundamentally shifts the work that you have to do.
Yeah. It's less about brute force, so like I really like I love Steve Jobs, and this is why how Dan and I conceptualized it in the book is 10x is more of a qualitative transformation more than a quantitative one. Even though if you want to do a quantitative jump, right, 10 times more subscribers, you can do that, but it is qualitative in a lot of ways because it transforms who you are and how you do things. That's why I use the example of crawling to walking, right? That's a qualitative change, right? So Steve Jobs, what he did with music was qualitative transformation. He took what was the music industry back then, call it back in the 90s when he was inventing the iPod, right? He reformed what music was, right? Back then you had to go to the store, buy CDs at the store, right? If you wanted one song, you had to buy the full album, right? And then you needed to, bring that home, and you'd have a whole bag of CDs, right? And how much of that music did you not want? At least 80% of it, right? And so he said, how do we get rid of all that stuff, right? How do we remove the 80%? And how do we, and so going from CDs to an iPod is a qualitative transformation, right? He didn't say, how can we sell 10 times more CDs, right? That's brute force. Like that's linear, and as weird as it sounds. He rethought how, what would actually change music such that a million X, the potential is there, but it's going to have to be changed. It's not how can we make our horses work 10 times harder? It's how do we shift from a horse and buggy to a car, right? And so, yeah, it forces you to think differently. And that's what the bigger future does, is it's not about more and brute force. It's about making a shift, a transformation that's ultimately going to enable unbelievable, potential. And that takes deep work to think through that. That's why you can't just, there's a great book, and Evan and I were talking about it, called Catching the Big Fish, right? And Evan was talking about how he's going fishing for some bigger fish right now. Catching the Big Fish is all about meditation, consciousness, and creativity. And he talks about how your attention and your consciousness is like the ocean. And if you're up at the surface, is all you can see is those small fish. And so, to let go of those small fish and kind of like a surface level attention where you're just scraping the surface, caught in the 80%, call it, you're gonna have to go deep. And it's going deep and seeing bigger fish. That's where those transformations are. That's where it's like, oh, this is a totally different way of looking at it. This is a totally different potential, but that takes deep work. That takes creating space. In chapter 5 of the book, we talk about, different models of time. Like Dan obviously has his free days and his focus days concept. There's also someone named Paul Graham. Paul Graham's an amazing entrepreneurial thinker. And he has what he calls either a maker schedule or a manager schedule. I think a lot of people, even entrepreneurs, have what Graham would call a manager schedule, where their time is like really busy, tons of meetings. They jump from thing to thing every hour, right? Whereas a maker schedule is like, no, you actually have like 4 to 8 hour blocks of time to think. right? Or to like solve a problem, like if you're a coder or if you're creating something, if you're actually innovating something and thinking through something, right? You actually have to do some deep work to connect some dots. You can't just like scrape the surface and be satisfied with, a surface level, quick dopamine hit. Like you actually, if you're going to actually do 10 times more important work, 10 times better work, right? Like you got to go deep and kind of break it down. This is even what Elon Musk talks about, going down to first principles, breaking things apart, seeing how it works, figuring out kind of what's possible. And I think that that's where you start to get a much higher return on your attention. So Dr. Alan Bernard, he talks about, it's not just about the quality of your attention. And certainly we're talking about quality versus quantity. If you're focused on quote unquote, the 20%, the quality of your attention is going to be a lot higher. You're shifting from a quantity of activity or a quantity of things you're focused on to a quality. But also Bernard talks about return on attention, where it's like, if I actually, like even just maybe read a great book, even this, I'm guessing you guys being here, you're going to get a big return on this attention, right? You could have just spent the day busy, but like this might change how you think about things. And so you're going to get a big return on attention for the ongoing future, right? But even, so like if I'm sitting and I'm focusing on something and I'm really thinking through something, I might not get the immediate return of something where I could just surface quick level, get a quick dopamine hit. But the return on my attention might pay dividends for the rest of my life, where it's like I actually figured something out or learned something or just worked on something that, I moved forward on. As an example, like I spent, call it a year working on this. Yes, it changed how I think. It changed how I write. But also just it is a thing that's going to be out in the world. And so like I'm going to get a return on this, on the attention I put into making this book. I'm going to get a return on that attention for the rest of my life. Even if not quantitatively, even if the book goes out of stock or stops selling in 10 years and like quantitatively I stop getting royalties, qualitatively I'm a different person because I actually went through the process of figuring out some of these ideas. Not that they're perfect. My future self will think a lot differently about them. But the return on your attention is really what you start to get when you start to get big things out of it. And so that's also part of, I think, the week design is like, what's the greatest return on my time and attention? What's going to be the thing that continues to pay my future self long into the future because I spent that day doing it? And think about relationships. I've got 6 kids, right? So like I get a huge return on attention when I invest time just being present with my kids. Like that's something that pays me for the rest of my life,
All right. We went deep there
Really
with
appreciate it.
Thank you, man.
Thank you very much.
No, it's great. It's great. I mean, it was my fault too. I asked some questions too. Great. Thank you,
That
Milko.
was
Appreciate you.
amazing. Thank you.
Who does we got? Francesco joining us. Let's go, Francesco. What's your question? See what he's got for us today.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for this wonderful session. It's amazing. I have one question that for sure can help all of us. Ben, what you said is for sure really a transmutation of energy, okay? You go in 4-dimensional, take what you want, and then you transmute in 3-dimensional. But how you deal with this in really practice? For example, I studied this material for many years. I studied with Bob Proctor for many years. So I want to understand how you deal with this.
Are you talking about
Because
like how you deal with the challenges
is,
of daily life, the challenges of getting distracted, and what do you get specific as you can?
For example, when you say, okay, you work from the end, from your ideal self, okay? Let's make an example. You want to act from 10x, okay? What you do mentally and practically in the mental space and in 3-dimensional space, in the material space. You act as the person you want to become.
So yeah, I think let's start it simple. First off, back to that quote I shared from Dan earlier, which is entrepreneurs who are too tightly scheduled don't have the space if you're too tightly scheduled, right? And this doesn't have to be just entrepreneurs. I think anyone who, even in the book Essentialism, Greg McKeown talks about the importance of creating space so that you can actually clarify the priority, right? And so I think part of designing for this to be a regular process, not a one-time thing where you get clarity and now you got to figure. For me, back to even Evan, designing around going on long walks or something like that, you were saying, that becomes part of the process where you're constantly kind of in meditation, thinking about clarifying your future self, analyzing your current life, thinking hard through the things you got to let go of, strategizing, like having space to think, to journal, to reflect, to have key conversations with people who you can kind of even get clear on and open up about decisions you're considering making. I think having that be built in to your life and just having, creating space for that, where that's a continuous process of clarifying, thinking about it. I journal about things. I journal about, if you looked at my journal, I flew here from Phoenix, right? I flew to Phoenix from Orlando. I was thinking about, where do I want to be in 5 years? What about 12 months from now? What's important in 10 years, right? And like, it's just, again, back to the idea of it being a draft. If you're writing the draft of a book, it's okay if the draft is incomplete. It's okay if you know that in a week from now, the draft might totally change, right? It's a draft. And so, but by working on the draft, you've got something to riff off of. And so by drafting, it's just really nice. You can update the draft. You can improve it. You might. And so there's nothing wrong with just thinking it through, talking about it, and then once you get clear and clear on it, you use that as just part of your decision-making process, as an example, and you set shorter term things, so for me, for example, like, I am interested in YouTube. It might be something I let go of in the future, but, as I'm thinking about my future self, I'm like, yeah, so I think I'll commit to trying to make a video a month in May, right? That might be a short-term strategy that I implement that I may achieve perfectly or imperfectly. And maybe, maybe at the end of the month, I'll say, I'm going to go for something a little different there. So I think what you're trying to get to is you're trying to get to like immediate clarity, ultimate clarity, and to like fully live it and be it today. And I'm saying it's more of a process, like, but you can use the future. So, you could be better as your future self today than you were yesterday. And you could maybe share aspects of your past self out more. And then you might come up with plans, short-term plans or strategies to run for it. Maybe you reach out to someone. And you're just continually doing it better and better on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. It's not just like a one-time shift change. Now you're your future self and like forever, it's a constant process of evolution.
One thing is more, for example, did you believe that it's something that is really correlated to belief system? Example, I want to share this with you. When I started to follow my mentor 15 years ago, the first thing that I asked him is, what about business plan? And he said me, I don't have a business plan. And he made 100 millions. And I said, how this is possible? And he said, because I don't believe in business plan. Then I went to another mentor and he said, oh, Francesco, it's impossible to make money without business plan. So finally, I deducted this, that it's all about belief system. Because, for example, if I go 10x, my 10x, as you said, is subjectively.
It's important to you. Yeah, your 10x may be irrelevant to me, right? But it's important to you.
Yeah. And so what I believe is, what I want to ask you is this: did you believe that it's about belief system? That, for example, for the law of reversibility, that with your psychological, if you change psychologically, you can change also physically. So if you change physically, you can change psychologically. For you, it's possible to think that it's all about belief. That, for example, a person that can think
Can I ask you a question real quick? Can I ask you a question real quick? This may sound weird. What is the answer you want me to give you? This is kind of a funny question. Obviously, you've thought about this for years, and maybe I can give an insight that you haven't gotten, and I'm happy to try. But I'm just wondering, what is it that you're ultimately trying to get at with this question?
That it's all about belief system.
Right. When you say belief system, right? Is that, so for example, I have a different belief system than Evan, right?
Yeah.
Which means that the things that I'm going to care about, worry about, and go for, and also my own process of going about it, is going to be very different from Evan, right?
Yeah.
And so is
That's
that
the last
is that what you're
piece.
talking about? Where it's like, I have a belief system, I also have a value system about what matters to me. And that's going to influence, quote unquote, the purposes that I go strive to fulfill, right? I might think that this is the most important thing that I could do with my life based on my belief system. And then I go for that. And that might, from Evan's perspective, not be interesting at all, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, this is what I want to
But I
ask.
also
And
think part of that belief system would be similar to like growth mindset versus fixed mindset, right? Do I believe I actually can change and become my future self, right? Do I believe that I can find the right people, right? Do I
yeah,
and so yeah, there are elements of course your belief system is going to shape not only what you go for, but how you go for it. And hopefully you're constantly transforming that belief system, you know, so that it's more useful, more valuable, more empowering. And so, yeah, you have a belief system, I have a belief system. They're all flawed, right? There's a quote from Stephen Covey, essentially, where he said, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are, right? So
yeah,
you see the world through your belief system. You see the world through your mental models. And
yeah.
I think it's really important to analyze those. There's even psychologists who explain ways in which you can get out of your belief system and actually analyze it critically and see where there's weaknesses in it. And it takes a lot of emotional development. So like, I know that I believe things very differently than I believed even like a year ago, or even 5 years ago, right? I know that my future self is going to believe and care about things that I don't understand right now or care about, right? And so I think, you know, yes, the belief system matters a lot, but for me, hopefully it's constantly getting better, or, you know, at least it's transforming. And so, yeah,
Okay,
that's how I think about that.
okay.
All right.
That's the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. I know we're getting close to finishing up, so let's bring up Giovanna and then maybe have some final thoughts from Ben. Let's see what Giovanna's got for us.
We'll do our best to see if we can cruise through these, but we'll just go as long as we can. Go ahead, Giovanna.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much. Of course, this is mind-blowingly awesome. And it's just peeling away a lot of stuff. And I'm like, wow, like I just did this yesterday and today. I'm like, I just scheduled something that is not in alignment with what I
There
want
you go.
in
Good
the future.
catch. Very good catch. You got to let those things go.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
it no but, no but, no but.
Go ahead. You can
And
say, but you can say, yeah. You can say, yeah, it's scary to let go of things.
yeah, I'm an actor, so we can't say but, right? In improv, we always have to say and, right? So it's like, I am an actor and I turned author. I wrote this book, Teen Anxiety No More, and it has just become my heart and my everything and my future self, what I want to do. And being an actor, you're always told like persistence, don't quit. Quitters never win, winners never quit. So how do you have any steps or suggestions on how I can overcome that? Like, oh my gosh, maybe I'm quitting on my acting, which isn't what I feel like I'm doing. I feel like I'm wanting to 10x, but that internal struggle of like, is it quitting? Am I quitting because I don't know? Does that make sense?
Well, let me just ask you this. Is your future self more, you know, is your future self still acting, or are you mostly doing stuff with the books? If you're honest with yourself, all progress starts by telling the truth. And you could say they're doing both. I'm just wondering, you know, what do you know, you're not quitting something if your future is inviting you to let it go. I mean, it's not like you're quitting because think about it. You're only, if you quit something because you still want it, but you're giving up, that's different than letting something go because it's no longer relevant. Like letting go of something because the future is inviting you to let it go is not the same as quitting something that you're giving up on because you've stopped believing in yourself, right? Like if I have a real dream, if I have a massive dream of accomplishing something and I'm on my way and I'm breaking myself down and I eventually just get to some point where I throw in the towel and settle for less. One of my favorite quotes, by the way, this quote says, this is from Robert Brault. He said, we're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. So let me say it again. Listen, we're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. Lesser goal. So listen, whoa, I know. Listen, one sec.
Yeah.
So often when we're going towards our goal and we're hitting obstacles, often we take a clear path to a lesser goal. We give up, or we shift to some 80% that's comfortable, right? And so, you know, you have to ask yourself, so I don't think it's quitting if you have a goal and you let go of lesser goals to get there. Sometimes your lesser goals are those 80% that were really valuable in the past, right? Blogging for me became a lesser goal. Staying in certain groups became a lesser goal, right? Where it's like, yeah, or hopping on social media instead of focusing or being with my kids is a lesser goal. We're all, you know, and so if you are really clear on your future self, you just gotta say, you know, what am I gonna let go of so that I can go through the process of becoming my future self? And sometimes the things you gotta let go of, those lesser goals, are things that really mattered to your past self. Maybe acting becomes a lesser goal, right? I'm not saying it is, you know, only you know your future self and what you want, but letting go of those lesser goals is massive evidence that you're committing more and more to the future that you want. So every time you peel away and let go of some of that 80%, let go of some of those lesser goals, you're demonstrating to yourself that you're being really serious about your future self, that you're committing to that.
Wow, that is so cool. Because it removes some of that weight, right? It's like we have this heaviness around this
Love that
80%.
she was just absorbing the whole thing. So what did you get at? I want to hear what you just digested.
That releasing things actually serves you versus
That's not quitting, that's
constraining you.
committing to your true future self.
Yeah, that is like beautifully framed. It just really opens things up instead of limiting you to think in, you know, a way
Have you
that
ever read the
you're
book, by the way? Have you ever read the book by Seth Godin called The Dip?
the dip.
The Dip.
No, I would no.
So Seth Godin wrote a little book. You could read the whole thing in an hour called The Dip. And he talks about the idea that winners never quit and quitters never win is a lie. You know, it's a myth. He says winners quit all the time. They just quit the right stuff at the right time. You know, so like I quit blogging. Does that mean I'm a loser? No, I just quit the right thing at the right time. You know, but I utilized it really deeply when it made sense to my future self. You know, there's a lot of things that I'm gonna have to let go of. I really think going 10x is it's likely just as much or even more about what you let go of. That 80%, those lesser goals, right? That old identity, those former commitments. It's more about honestly what you let go of, so that you can then create the space to go deep on where you're now going to go.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. And acting got me here because I wrote the book because of my acting,
Sure.
ironically enough. So it's just like having that
You gotta just be honest about yourself and your future self.
yeah.
And I think that that level of honesty can be scary for people, you know, and you know, maybe in the future you will want to either get back into acting, or maybe becoming a bigger actor or doing various types of roles becomes really important to you. Maybe right now, this is what you're being called to. It's kind of that call to adventure, right? This is what you're being called to.
Yeah.
And there's a resistance to the call and an invitation back to lesser goals. Your 80% that's safe and comfortable, your security blanket.
Yeah.
And, you know, you don't have to peel it all away at once. I think that was what we were talking about earlier. Like you could certainly, if there's certain things that you just know, I'm going to hold on to this because I'm scared. And yeah, maybe you could let go of that meeting, right? And you realize, oh, like one of the things that, and I hit this in the book, there's a concept called loss aversion. And in psychology, there's a lot of research that shows that humans are a lot more driven to avoid loss than to seek gain. In other words, losses feel more painful than gains feel good, right?
Mhm.
And so like our brains are really designed to avoid loss, right? Like what we end up doing is we end up inflating the potential risks and downsides way out of proportion, right? So it's like, oh, if I don't go to that meeting, like, you know, we start to create these worst case scenarios when like in reality, it's kind of like, think about when you're wanting to go ask your boss for a raise, right? Or something like that. Like we start projecting out all of these crazy worst case scenarios when eventually we go and do it, we realize, oh, wasn't that bad, right?
Yeah.
You know, distinction that came through for me today in listening to you talk versus just reading the book was that the 80% that you need to let go to get to 10x will fight for its existence.
Deep, intensely, not only on the psychological side, that's your former identity, but also situationally. You know, people don't want, you know, you're also, by you changing, like you're going to require them to change. And, you know, like whether that's letting go of an employee or, you know, whether that's changing a relationship, it's going to heavily defend itself.
Yeah, and so that's maybe it is in there. I mean, and maybe just the way you worded it today, just as a distinction for me, that you, not only the people around you might fight you, or clients might not be happy that you're now leaving them and don't have
Sure,
your
yeah, they'll
program
feel
anymore,
abandoned or
right?
whatnot. They'll have their own story.
But also you yourself, like there's parts of yourself, most of yourself is actually fighting against you to become the 10x version of you. And so to expect the resistance and then work through it.
So there's a really, really good book on this subject. And maybe this stuff's coming out cleaner because honestly, I've studied this a lot since writing the book. You know, I finished the book like 6 months ago and I've been studying this, but there's a Harvard psychologist named Robert Keegan. He has a book called Immunity to Change. And so what you're talking about is the built-in immunities we have to changing. We actually psychologically have built-in immunities to the changes we want. So like, for example, let's just say I want to achieve X goal. Well, I have these massive immunities to making that change. And what he calls it, basically it's your subconscious, by the way, but he calls it in this book hidden commitments and limiting beliefs. So you have commitments and they're hidden to you. They're commitments that your former self made. These are your past self. So commitment is a big part of identity. So you have commitments that are keeping you in that 80%. Maybe you have a commitment to being really loyal, right? And so like that's going to keep you in certain relationships that you now know, right? And I'm not saying loyalty is bad. I'm just saying when you start to observe yourself resisting these changes that you want to make, and you see yourself staying in situations, opportunities, that you like already know, it's kind of like it doesn't resonate anymore. You start to ask, well, what is the hidden commitment I have that's keeping me here? It's my immunity to the change I want. And so we have these hidden commitments that keep us doing the things that we've done or in the situations or the relationships. And when you start peeling those away, you start to say, yeah, this was a concept or an idea that my past self really believed in and really, was really important to them, which is why it makes so much sense why this is hard for me to let go of.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's your past self, your past identity, and your past, commitments and beliefs that make it really, those are the immunities to the change you want. And those are the things that are defending itself from you moving on and shifting these things and going deep onto the next stage. So your past self is defending itself against your future self.
I love it. Well, we've got just over 2 minutes left. I want to give Ben a chance to have kind of a final message. One, Angel is going to put a link to our survey that we do every time. So if you want to pop it in the chat, please fill out that survey and let us know what you thought of Ben and the feedback and how we can make the next one amazing as well. The book is 10x is easier than 2x. So if you want to go pick that up, it's my favorite book of the year. As I said at the beginning, I've chunked out a lot of pages. I get a lot of books. This one is legit. And 2 minutes, final message. What do you got for us, Ben?
Please go buy the book. Please, whether it's the audiobook or the book, whether you listen or read, as soon as you get it, please go through the introduction as fast as you can. From there, if it doesn't blow you away, throw it away. Seriously, read the introduction. No, seriously, I'm promising you. You'll hear the story we were talking about Michelangelo and his various 10Xs, and then you'll see kind of how this idea is truly, in a lot of ways, the opposite of how many of us have thought about this idea. And then that sets the stage for the book. And I said that the book is obviously, I think it'll be very valuable to anyone in this group. So yeah, I guess my invitation is please get the book, please read it. If you love it, share it. But first things first, get it and either listen to or read the introduction as fast as possible. And then from there, you can decide what you'll do next with it. In terms of Lady Lexi and Lorraine, I just want to say, I'm sorry I couldn't get to you guys' questions. I see your hands up. I love you guys. Who knows what will happen in the future, but hopefully this is a valuable conversation. And yeah, I would just say, putting it in simple terms, your 10X future self is the David, right? And to become the David, you have to strip away everything that's not your 10X future self, which is the 80% of your past self that is to be celebrated, right? Letting go of the 80% initially feels, you can have negative emotions towards letting that go, right? You could have frustration, anger, disappointment, grieving, right? A seeming loss. Really what you're doing is you're stripping away and opening up the space. And so letting go of the 80% is to be celebrated. It's celebrated what it was. You celebrate what it was. I celebrate blogging. It was amazing. I celebrate the relationships that brought me here, but now, there's no longer alignment on the next 10X. And you want to celebrate the past. You want to celebrate The 80% is you let it go. It's actually a gain that you're letting it go. It's not a gap. It's not a loss. It's truly a gain that you're letting this go, but you can celebrate it. It can be framed beautifully and positively. And so to go 10x, it's a tight filter. It's a massive filter that's gonna, just like my son with tennis, less options to 10x. You know, that those less options are your 80% that you're gonna have to strip away. And then you're gonna have to go deep on the few things that have 10x potential. And you're gonna become a 10x master, deeper at what you do. And so it's just an invitation to mastery, an invitation to stripping away everything that's not your David, which is your purest self, your 10x future self. So hope you enjoy it. It's been happy to be here. Love this guy. And talk to you guys all soon. Loved being with you.
There he is, Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Go support this man. I love him. Thank you guys for watching. Continue to believe, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Take care, everybody.
What'd you think, brother?